to give an archery exhibition in New York City Central Park. The event received coverage by all of the major networks. He was shooting steel-tipped arrows, you know, the hunting arrows that look like two razor blades for a tip. Pace punctured bullseyes without a miss. Then he called for a volunteer. All you have to do, said Pace, is hold the apple in your hand, about waist level. Well, ABC correspondent Josh Howell took a bold step forward, stood there with a small apple in his hand, a larger one probably in his throat. Pace took aim from 30 yards away. We all held our breath. Then thwacked a clean hit that exploded the apple and then stuck into the target behind. Everybody applauded Hal, and all was smiles until the cameraman approached with a hangdog look. I'm sorry, Josh, he says, I didn't get it. I had a problem with the viewfinder. Could you do that again? Well, it sounds like Josh Howell had faith in the archer, but just how much faith did he have? Was he going to have a 2-for-2 faith there? Today we are hearing about a faith, not a real big faith. Jesus speaks of a faith that's the size of a mustard seed. The size of a mustard seed. We're beginning today in Luke chapter 17 at verse number 5. Luke 17, verse number 5. And I don't think I've ever included these verses in a sermon before. Luke 17 at verse number 5. It says, the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. You hear the disciples plea, increase our faith. It reveals their awareness of their spiritual inadequacy. Increase our faith. They're not asking for power, they're asking for capacity. And he replied, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted into the sea, and it will obey you. You'll notice that Jesus does not say, I'm going to increase your faith just as you've asked, but rather he flips the script on them. He doesn't promise them more faith, but causes them to reevaluate and see the potential in the faith that they already have. He affirms that even the tiniest amount, the mustard seed, can uproot the mulberry tree and cast it into the sea. It's sometimes mistranslated as a sycamore tree, and it's a Greek word, sycamino, so we can see why it would be translated that way. But it's a black mulberry. Morus nigra, the white mulberry and the black mulberry, both can grow about 50 feet tall. Pretty good sized tree, isn't it? Usually about 39 feet tall. It's still pretty high. I think we had a bucket truck that went up 40 feet at one point. And once you're up there, that's pretty well up there. Its leaves are shaped like Bradford pears, kind of pear-shaped leaves. It has a fruit that looks like a whole bunch of blackberries. Pretty tree. Tall tree, big tree. He says, this mulberry, not a, you know, it shows us they're standing there at a mulberry tree, doesn't it? You can say to this tree, be cast into the sea. Could they be looking at a big, tall mulberry tree there on the seashore on a hillside? Maybe so. Maybe so. Faith as small as a mustard seed is a small faith indeed. A mustard seed's 1 to 2 millimeters. You think of a grain of sand. Little bitty thing. little bitty thing, a grain of sand. You know, the mustard seed grows into a small tree, or like a shrub, I guess you might say. Maybe 6 to 12 feet. It's something that works with time. It's something that works with time. Looks like a tree, though. Has many trunks coming up. And that's from whence it gets its strength, through its unity. And the leaves and the flowers are edible of the mustard seed plant, or mustard plant, I guess we might call it. You can make things out of it. I bet each and every one of us have some mustard in the refrigerator, don't we? It's a useful tree. The oil can be extracted. It's beautiful in the garden. Guess what color the flowers are on it? You got it. Bright yellow. Bright yellow. It's a beautiful tree. And so the overriding message here is a sand-sized grain of faith can move a mulberry tree, a big tree, casting it into the ocean. And from another gospel, we can see that same size of faith can move a mountain into the ocean as well. You know, as we look at Jesus' teachings, his teachings about faith stand in the forefront. He was always fussing at the disciples, "Oh, ye of little faith, oh, ye of little faith." But he's saying here, even that little bitty bit of faith that you've got, it can do wonders. You know, when Hudson Taylor went to China, he made the voyage on a sailing vessel, and it neared a channel between southern Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, and the wind quit. The ship was drifting towards some uninhabited, or maybe somewhat inhabited islands. The captain came into his cabin, the story has it, and said, "Please pray. We're drifting towards some islands over here. There's no wind, and we believe the people on those islands might be cannibals. Pray for wind." And Taylor responded, "Raise the sails." The captain said, "Well, I can't do that. The men will think I'm crazy." "Oh, if you want me to pray, raise the sails." So the captain did so. A little while later, the captain came back down and found Hudson on his knees still praying. Said, "You can stop praying now. We have more wind than we know what to do with." That is faith, isn't it? And if we are praying for wind, we need to hoist the sails. If we're praying for rain, we need to what? Carry an umbrella, right? We need to believe. Even with a little faith, God can do wonders. Even here, a little faith can do wonders. You know, you can only reason your way so far into faith, because it is believing where we have not yet seen. And if we could reason our way fully into faith, well, it wouldn't exactly be faith, because faith always has to have a little bit of room for doubt. Lord gives us just enough to believe. But if there were no room for doubt, there'd be no need for faith. You see what I'm saying? He gives you just enough to believe. And then he causes you to make a choice. In essence, at some point in life, you have to say, "I simply believe." That is faith. That is faith. Were there no room for doubt, there'd be no need for faith. You know, on a deeper level, as we look at the properties of the tree mentioned here, the symbolism of the mulberry tree, it's something that has deep roots. It's a resilient tree. It's a big tree. And it can represent entrenched obstacles. You face any entrenched obstacles in your life? I bet we all do to some extent, don't we? Long-standing burdens. There are things that just seem unmovable to you that you're up against. Jesus said, even the smallest faith can confront that which is before us that seems immovable? What is it you're facing in life that just seems unmovable? Lift it to Jesus in faith. That faith can move a mountain, as we saw in another parable. You know, when I think about that, I have to ask the question, where else are you going to hide a mountain? We're not just talking about getting rid of an immovable object to God's purpose for ourselves, but for generations to come. You know, we might not even be around long enough to see the fruit of our prayers and our endeavors, but God's doing a work. If we were looking at Paul in Bible study, Paul was writing letters. He felt compelled to write a letter. That letter to go to whoever it's addressed to. In his letters, he'd also say, send my greetings to such and such and such and such. Do you think Paul had the slightest idea that centuries down the road, millions of people would be reading his letters? But that's kind of the way that mustard seed works. It's amazing the things it can do. That faith that is the size of a mustard seed. In the film, based on a true story, which is Schindler's List, there was a German businessman, Oskar Schindler, decided to use Jews in his machine factory during World War II. It was cheap labor. It gave him a better profit. And since the Jews were used for labor, they wouldn't go to a death camp. Over the course of the film, though, he develops a relationship with these people. He uses his wealth and he uses his influence to save their lives. He's shrewd, he's wealthy, he's a powerful German businessman. He was a part of the Nazi Party, and he saved the lives of hundreds of Jews. You know, he had enough faith to step, knowing that what he was doing could get him executed by the Nazi Party. And when the war was over, he had every reason to think that he was probably going to be executed by the Allies. And yet he walked in faith, doing what was good and right. And in the end, who interceded for him? None other than his slave labor force, the Jews that worked for him. They realized that he was a good man and what he was doing was for their good. He believed he could get away with it, and he did indeed. And while we're right here at the thought of a forced labor force, our passage takes a strange turn. And that's why I couldn't ever remember preaching this one before, because it is such an odd turn. In verse number 7 it says, "Who among you would say to your slave, who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, come here at once and take your place at the table? Would you not rather say to him, prepare supper for me? Put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink. Later you may eat and drink. Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, we are worthless slaves. We have only done what we ought to have done." Indeed, this is a very strange turn in these verses that are speaking about faith the size of a mustard seed. But obviously important. Obviously important. And in these verses we just read, Jesus is still answering their question, addressing their request. What is it about humility that's needed in the midst of faith? Something's there, and Jesus is indeed showing us this. He's not asking for trouble over the prospect of slavery, but rather asking if we're willing to be slaves. for the King of Kings in our lives. Verses 7 through 10, it is a shift in tone. After the miracle metaphor, Jesus grounds the disciples in servanthood. Faith isn't a badge, you know. It is a posture. The servant's role. The servant doesn't expect thanks for what he's doing, because he's simply doing what's required. Do you like to make a big splash? I do every now and then, and I forget my servant's heart. How about you? This challenges entitlement and spiritual pride. Faith and obedience here. Jesus links faith not to flashy miracles, but to daily humble service. Daily humble service. And worthy doesn't mean worthless. It means recognizing that our service flows from grace. You know, on John Wesley's tombstone, if you read his journals, he wanted these words written on his tombstone: God, be merciful to me, an unprofitable servant. And he gathered that from these very verses that we're looking at. They didn't put that on his tombstone. They put something very similar, though. What they ended up writing was, Reader, if thou art constrained to bless this instrument, give God the glory. Once again, a humble approach. In the end, all we can say is we've just done what he's enabled us to do. And great power comes with that. Great power comes with a humble heart. Why do you think Jesus ties faith and humility together? You know, the disciples weren't the cream of the crop. Have you noticed that as we've studied them throughout Scripture? They weren't the cream of the crop, much like the mustard seed. They were small and underwhelming. They fought all the time over which one was the greatest. They had Jesus' message to them all mixed up at times. They were learning humility, though. They were up against something much like a mulberry tree, something deeply entrenched, strong with deep roots, tall in stature. Could it be that they were expected to uproot and replace the religion of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? They're also up against Rome, and obviously up against all the forces of Satan. Yeah, that'll teach one to walk humbly, won't it? Because when we are weak, he's strong. That's what the Bible tells us. Would people actually listen to them? And yes, indeed, is the answer to that. They certainly did. They needed humble hearts and faith. Faith the size of a mustard seed. So this passage is a tension between the miraculous and the mundane, in one sense. God uses the least likely of people and circumstances to accomplish his goals. And the smallest things that you're doing for his kingdom, he will bless them. You'll be surprised at times just what he does. You know, as you look around our area here, you realize a whole lot of the churches in this area began as union churches. This church here was a union church. I remember reading about one down in Elizabeth, where several of the churches came from. It would be a place, a little log building, something like that, you know, out here in the middle of nowhere. And the Methodists would meet there, and the Baptists and the Presbyterians, they all took time about sharing the building. And when you think about that setting, you picture some farmer out there whittling away at logs to make a place for Christians to gather. And could that person have ever realized the churches that would have sprung out from those very, very humble roots? That's one way in which the mustard seed works. It's not a fast bang, but rather a slow, steady source of strength. That's the way our faith is supposed to be. Sometimes it does operate like an explosion, but more often than not, it's just from slow daily activities that build and build and build. When we look at the mustard seed, when we look at the tree, what is the most desirable fruit of the tree? It'd be the seeds itself, their self. You think? So when we compare that to our faith, that would be a faith that builds more faith in others. Do you build faith in other people with your life? I hope you do, and I'll bet you do. You might be surprised at how you rub off on others. Your workplace, or school, or just whatever. Friends, neighbors, they'll see something in you that builds something in them. There's one more thing about this passage I want you to see before we go into communion this morning. And that is that the mulberry tree is sometimes called the casket tree. The mulberry tree was called the casket tree. These guys would have all known that, because caskets were made from strong wood. And there was a fable, myth, if you will, that went along with the tree, that the black mulberry tree, which more than likely this was, would stain one's hands blood red. And that in and of itself was, by tradition, supposed to have been a curse that reminded those who had their hands turned red that there was blood on their hands. So we have this image of death and sin right there in the midst of the tree. And that makes you realize, why would you want to throw a perfectly good mulberry tree into the midst of the sea? Just maybe. That's what the good Lord is doing with His great plan. Because if we look at the book of Micah 7:19, it says, you will cast all your sins into the depth of the sea. What a reflection that is. And isn't that just exactly what Jesus was here to do? It came at a great price. Sin and death will be cast away in Jesus' kingdom. It came at a great, great price. But this too is received through faith. Faith even the size of mustard seed.